Starman by Time Convergence. I am. As I wander through space and time, reveling in the grasp of the infinite visions of parallel universes pulsating before my sight, I wondered to myself, was this worth it? Was there ever any meaning at all to what I had done? I transported myself to the surface of a large star some 20 billion light years away. As I walked upon its bright facade, admiring the dancing pulses of heat and radiation, I began to ponder about my own existence. It was during a period of great meditation that I preferred to resign myself to beautiful and often hostile environments, as it gave me peace of mind. Nothing else could be there except myself. Amidst the flares, I planted a seed of thought within my head. Existence itself has no meaning. There never was, and there never will be. Purpose and meaning is synthetic. It is something designed to sugarcoat the fact that we are all meaningless beings inhabiting a small region in the vast expanses of the perpetually expanding universe, whose boundaries we will most likely never be able to explore, let alone see. It has been almost 3 billion years since humanity wiped itself out. Nothing was spared, not even the culture or legacy. Of course, small articles of past civilization still exist up to this day. Old graffiti on ruins, tattered homes, fallen monuments. There is not much left, and virtually no one to remember or recognize the existence of such articles. Do I find it sad? I say nay. The death of a concept, you see, is no more relevant to the universe than a dog's perspective to the internal workings of the finest, most complex timepiece a human brain could ever conceive. Perhaps even the death of anything. Ideas, cultures, people, homes, emotions. It is all irrelevant. Petty, ideology-infused concepts, tangible or essential. It doesn't matter, and it never has. Perhaps nihilism is the one truth that is rung straight, even if the now extinct human societies refuse to accept it, labeling it as a pessimistic approach to life. I stood up, levitating myself into space as I bid the mesmerizing luminescence of the star farewell. During the last days of life on Earth, during which there was a pitiful semblance of organization, I managed to establish a meaningful conversation with the last of the inhabitants. One of them was a 13-year-old girl. Her name was 3. I asked her why such a name. It was because her mother believed that the number 3 was a lucky number. Wasn't it supposed to be 7? It didn't matter, but having talked with 3, I had observed that she did not think like everyone else. She knew the truth behind existence, the same truth I had stumbled upon when I began to explore the cosmos. 3 had this blank, 1,000-yard stare in her eyes, as if she had seen everything and yet thought nothing of it. Like a weary, battle-exhausted soldier whose eyes stared back at the empty vastness of the observable universe. 3 affectionately called me Mr. Star, and I found it a most suiting moniker. We would often walk early in the morning, and we would talk about her hobbies and her friends, while I would occasionally surprise her with small magic tricks. To anyone else, it would have been a cheap illusion. But to that girl, whose eyes widened at the sight of dancing pillars of light, it meant the world. Frankly, in an environment of scarceness and ruins, there was not much entertainment to be had. 3's favorite food, perhaps, was mushroom soup. She and a couple of other young individuals would head to the forest, pick their daily harvest of mushrooms, and return home to a haphazard convergence of makeshift homes with the smiling faces of their parents. By night, plumes of smoke would fill the air as flames served to illuminate their small villages, seated amongst roofless, gutted buildings. Days before the rest of humanity ceased to exist, I gave 3 a parting gift. It was a simple wristwatch, and I made it so that it never stopped ticking, continuously running on dark matter. She did not know how to wear one, so I personally slipped it onto her wrist and secured it so that it would not bob or wiggle around. She embraced me, but I was unable to feel anything physically. I had been so for several million years now, but despite the lack of external stimulus, I felt, for the first time in such a long time, a small sense of satisfaction, which is equivalent to how animals, including humans, would interpret as happiness, and a genuine happiness it was. 3 would use her watch to count down the last days of Earth. I watched as a large asteroid rust past the atmosphere, its front burning a vivid, bright orange before finally striking the planet itself. The explosion was spectacular, disintegrating the Earth into large chunks of dull rock. The very concept of destruction itself was natural. It did not have to mean that it was good or bad. I neither enjoyed nor felt despair at destruction, or even creation. It did not have to mean anything. Anything, then, does not have to mean anything. Over the course of 1 billion years, my actions have dulled, and I have been idle. Having traveled countless galaxies, and having seen and experienced the wonders of the universe, I decided to travel across all dimensions, all the way up to the 10th, the last possible dimension, where everything and anything, and thus nothing, is happening simultaneously. Perhaps it was time to restart, and maybe even do things differently this time. Gaining a tachyonic pace, I sped to before anything ever existed. A special, might I call it, paradoxical case of existing in inexistence. A feature unique to the 11th dimension. It was absolutely dark and empty. A void of total nothingness, including dark matter. In a state like this, I carefully created an event horizon surrounding myself, so as to not blip into non-existence. I may have just violated the deepest laws of physics, or perhaps, despite the longevity of my existence, had yet to learn all about it. I waited for the first expansion of the known universe, and it was spectacular. Meaningless, of course, but spectacular nonetheless. Everything does not have to have meaning, even if ultimately there is none. You just exist. You become. You are. Even if I choose to do things differently this time, nothing will alter the outcome of meaninglessness. We are all just a cosmic coincidence. I shall now watch and marvel as the stars and the planets form around me for billions upon billions of years. Did I feel then that I was going to be in another cycle of existence, of creation and destruction for an unimaginably long amount of time? Perhaps. Maybe what has kept me so long after what has been the longest amount of time is that I've lost a sense of humanity, or perhaps the ability to sympathize with that sense. I no longer feel, but simply exist, like the universe itself. I am. It started when we called out to the stars, into the darkness. We felt so small, tumbling through vast emptiness while clinging to the skin of the world and without a single reason why. We were curious, yes, but ultimately I think we were just terribly frightened. We were young, so very young. We were children, and like a lonely, lost child, we did the only thing we could think of to make it stop. We did what we thought we had to do to make the universe make sense. We called for help. For years, we scanned the sky for a sign. We sent signals to the stars in the darkness beyond. Are we alone? But the skies were quiet. Always so quiet, leaving us to our own makings. But crying children never cease, and neither did we. We sent calls into every corner of space for decade after decade. We refused to believe no one was out there. They had to be. Yet for some unknown reason, they never answered us. Everyone remembers when that changed. They think it responded to the Arecibo message from 1974. The response to the Arecibo message was received almost 3 months ago, in 2 separate parts. The first part of the message was received at the Hat Creek Radio Observatory in California. The Allen telescope array picked up what sounded like static interference that continued on for over an hour. It consisted of unintelligible screeching and buzzing sounds that continued without pause for the whole hour. The meaning of this message was never discovered, if it had one. The only thing we knew was that the signal's origin came from somewhere in the Hercules constellation near Messiah 13. As soon as that signal stopped, the real message began. We made contact that day, and we were asked a question.
Who is there?
It came not through the radios, but as a voice. A voice inside all of our heads, asked the question to all of us. I heard it, my wife heard it, the young heard it, and the old heard it. Even the deaf heard it. Everyone, everywhere, heard this voice whisper that question in their heads, in every language on Earth. I remember it almost too clearly. It asked in that familiar yet indescribable voice that's always there in my mind. It was like one of my own thoughts had gone rogue and had decided to speak directly to me. The world seemed to stop as everyone listened for what came next.
Where are you?
The heavy questions seemed to linger in our minds for hours afterwards, and then for days, and then for weeks. That day changed everything. There were the doubters from the very beginning, and the holy ones who claimed that God had spoken to all of us and that the time to repent was now. There were those who claimed they'd heard nothing, and those who claimed the aliens had given them their own secret messages. And, of course, There were those who truly believed that we had been contacted for the first time by an extraterrestrial race like us, one ready to communicate, ready to lead us out of the dark. We were wrong. We never made contact with alien life. At least, nothing comprehensible or discernible to human understanding. The stars are vast, and in their vastness our voices had touched the ears of something truly incomprehensible. Something hungry and malevolent. The voice. We realized our mistake when the ground started to groan. Beneath our feet, everywhere, the ground seemed to moan. A muffled sound shook through the dust and dirt below us. No one knew what was causing it, at least, not until the calls started coming in. The graveyards were screaming. All at once, the dead had started screaming. Every deceased man, woman, and child was turning in their graves. All the animals did so. Every dog, every cat, everything that had ever walked this earth. The cries of ancient whales shook the seas, and the shrill screeching of birds echoed in the forests. The caskets shook, and the morgues howled. The voices stopped together in an instant, leaving the world in an amplified silence. In their absence, a new sound filled the air. The voice returned.
I hear you.
Came as a whisper from behind, an ominous yet oddly playful presence that felt so close, but was truly still so far away. It let us breathe in the silence for a minute before it made us a promise. It was a promise we all knew to be true.
I am coming.
The voice was gone, and the air was again filled with screams. This time, they were from the living. After the voice had gone, we were left to our own devices. Millions panicked, and rightfully so, as chaos took hold of the streets. Many would die in the violence and the gunfire of that night. They would be known as the raptured before long, and the rest of us were the condemned. We could only wait. Screaming dead was only the first of the side effects that we felt as the voice approached. The closer it got, the more we felt it. That first night, after the screaming, we noticed the stars bleed for the first time. A section of the western sky had turned black, blacker than the night. It was only truly visible because of the ring of stars around it. The light from those stars had turned red, and they seemed to bleed across the sky like food coloring dropped into water. Their light swirled and flowed all around the edge of some unseen mass. I knew that I was staring into the face of the voice. Our scientists claimed that nothing was there, and that their radar and scans always came up empty. Their telescopes could see nothing but darkness in that section of space. However, the proof was right in front of us every night. That ring of darkness got wider, and more stars bled in the sky. We watched it come. As each night passed, the black spot would widen, and more stars would distort and bleed around it. During the day, a new hell would greet us. The side effects worsened. The day always brought something new. I'm sure most of what happened will go untold or unknown. Animals started disappearing. All of them. No trace, no tracks, no bodies were left behind. Pets would run away, some violently so. They all retreated, never to be seen again. The forests were left abandoned, the oceans empty. The air was left silent. The world left seemed empty and lonely. They left like water receding from the shore, just before the tsunami breaks. One day, About 2 weeks ago, scientists tried to talk to the voice again. They hoped, perhaps, to reason with it. They told it about what was happening on our world and asked it questions. The scientists begged. It didn't speak. When asked, "What do you want?" the voice sent a response. The next night, the skies lit up with streaks of fire. It was alight for hours, blazoned with orange and red. We didn't realize the effects until the next day when the televisions turned to static and the telephones refused to work. We had sat, watching, as all the satellites were knocked out of the heavens. After that, reports became rumors and rumblings, sanity a thing of the past. The air chilled and weighed us down. The voice was nearly here. Everyone felt it. It rained for a week after the satellites fell. The rain was salty and mired with an unknown filth that turned the grass black. Maybe the satellites tracked something back in with them when they hit the sky. No one knew for sure. All we know is that it fell from clouds black as charcoal and blotted out the sun like liquid ash. Darkness fell upon us for days. When the clouds went away, the skies were empty. There were no clouds, yet the sky hung low and gray. If the sun was anywhere in the sky, it never made itself known. Even it had abandoned us. Each day grew slowly darker and darker until the night and day became almost the same. Some people would claim later that they'd seen things in the dark. Creatures with gangly limbs and crooked faces, lurking in the corner of their vision. They were tall, white creatures that looked molted and rotten through their transparent skin. Appearances would last for just a second or two before vanishing without a trace. Some believed this was the first step in the aliens' invasion, but the rest of us didn't know what to think. We just knew that it was nothing that simple or benign. They must have been hallucinations, just more madness to endure, but ultimately as harmless as anything else, as harmless as the screams of the dead, the missing animals, and the dying sky. Appearances slowly increased in duration and number. I think everyone saw them once at the least, but I don't think a single person would ever guess why they were truly here. They never touched nor spoke to anyone, and they certainly never harmed anyone. Most who got good looks at them described them as mournful or sorrowful looking. Some even claimed the creatures watched over them at night, and others even claimed that it seemed as if the creatures were sorry for them. One claimed to have seen one prostrate upon the ground, hands clasped above its head. He said it was praying for us. Prayer was no help. Churches and places of worship that had divided us for so long failed to bring hope to any in the end. The voice let them pray and beg for a while, but just days ago the voice ended it all. No one questioned how, for at this point nothing that had happened surprised anyone anymore. But on the final day, all books of worship burned. Every last Bible, every Quran, everything. People rushed to their centers of faith, but found no solace. The churches and temples had suffered the same fates, if not worse. The people were left abandoned by their greatest hopes. There were rumors of churches all over the world with walls formed from the bodies of those who sought refuge. They were merged into the walls, stuck to them like flies in a trap. They died, still pleading for hope, but they were beyond God's help. The rest of us had learned to stop begging. We waited. The final message came. From beyond the sky it fell upon us. The voice echoed, and it spoke the simple truth.
I am here.
There was a darkness beyond the horizon, the likes of which I doubt has ever been seen. It brings with it the screams of countless souls, and it moves fast. The stars are dying now. and I know they'll never be seen again. The light is dying so fast. Believe this not as a warning. No, it's far too late for that. Instead, consider this the last realization, the last humanity will ever know. For we used to wonder whether or not we were alone and lost, but never whether or not we were safe and hidden. The universe is infinite, and our understanding was significantly more finite. We should never have beckoned to the darkness. Instead, we should have clung to the light and closed our eyes every time we returned to the void. As the final minutes approach, I hold one final truth to be certain. I now know why the skies were always so quiet. The pyramid at the end of the street. I lived with my parents on a suburban street ending in a cul-de-sac. Our neighbor, Mr. Maxwell, was a widower who brought us home baked pies and helped my sister with her math homework. My high school crush, Natalia, lived in a brick bungalow 3 houses down. On Sundays, we all went to church, and twice a month during the summer there was a street-wide barbecue. In the winters, the kids went sledding on a nearby hill. Growing up, I considered it boring. Looking back, it was paradise. The Oboras moved in November. From the beginning, it was obvious they were different. They didn't attend our church. They didn't make small talk by the community mailbox. Instead, they smiled and spoke about their own faith, Eknaism. Buddhist and Maya thought is connected, Mr. Abora once told me, because the Maya crossed the Pacific and colonized Asia. Although they were never aggressive in their proselytizing, it was their one topic of conversation, and we quickly learned to avoid them altogether. However, this didn't seem to faze them, and many of us recalled their polite but ominous refrain. Unfortunate, but you will soon see the truth. Those words echoed in my head when on a particularly dark February night, the pyramid appeared at the end of the street. It was ethereal, an effervescent volume of red mist, and one by one we came out of our houses to gaze upon its impossible appearance until every house was empty, and the street was filled with silent awe. The pyramid pulled us towards itself, and like human ice breaking from a glacier, individually we went, freeing ourselves from the loving grips of our neighbors and families. I watched as Mr. Maxwell drifted towards the pyramid and disappeared into it. And then a short time later, the pyramid took me. Despite its tangible exterior dimensions, the pyramid was infinitely vast on the inside. Its crimson redness pulsed, and space itself hummed. And from the hum emanated the voice of Mr. Abora. Welcome, welcome, Norman. Tonight you shall know enlightenment. I fell. On impact, I arose and saw before me an axe and the kneeling, crying figure of Mr. Maxwell. Don't! He sobbed. Bloody spray adorned his face. Take the axe, instructed Abora. This is your destiny. I hesitated. Mr. Maxwell cried hysterically. His hands were bloody too. Understand, Norman. Everything up to now, everything
It has been for you. All life has been for you. My heart pumped hotly. I picked up the axe. You are the one. And somewhere deep inside, I knew he was right. I was special. Mr. Maxwell raised his eyes to look at me. I crushed his skull. His body crumpled. His blood painted my face, and I fell to my knees, tossing the axe aside. I had done it. Then, Mr. Maxwell's body disappeared. Natalia landed in front of me. Our eyes met. "Take the axe," Mr. Rabora instructed her out of the hum. "This is your destiny. Natalia, all life has been for you." "Don't," I sobbed.
Harsh light blazed down on the factory floor, painting everything brilliant white. Reflective surfaces of polished metal and hosed concrete. The new implants in her forearms and back burned fiercely, and she could feel an infection taking hold. The airborne pathogens wriggling under the dermoplast patches slapped over her wounds. A stab of pain flared in her mind, reminding her that she was barely on schedule. So she picked up the pace of her work to compensate until another flame of needle and thread fire in her mind told her she was working too fast. She worked like a machine. They made her think like a machine, and they made her live like a machine. A stimulant oozed into the biochemical cocktail that kept her mind active all the time, and she briefly enjoyed the rush, until a stab of agony reminded her that her dopamine levels were also monitored and she shouldn't get too high. The infection sites were boiling hot now and itchy. Clearly, the adaptive, mutating pathogens had become immune to the latest round of neobiotics, and she was in for a new round of surgery tomorrow, where they would cut out the infected tissue and blast her with radiation. Nausea crested in her, and she faltered on the assembly line. In response, a spear of pain skewered her through the temples, incapacitating her, and she dropped to the factory floor, another worker taking her place, and another heavily modified human being dragging her by the foot to the infirmary. A nightmarish landscape of infinite dimensions greeted her return to consciousness. Organic shapes leered at her, and grotesque, lurid colors flowed and melted into newer shapes. "You are delirious," the sensible, rational corner of her afflicted mind told her. Fighting through the visual hallucinations, one of her neural implants responded to her desperate pleas for assistance, flooding her with a neurochemical purging agent. Her mind clearing, she registered something akin to extreme alarm. She shouldn't be able to order an implant to do anything. Probing, she experimented by querying her current status, and her neural implants happily responded, telling her the current medical status of her body, both arms amputated, and that she was suffering the after effects of a wash of delta radiation to purge the remaining infection. They would fit her for new arms, she knew, facilitating her return to work as soon as she'd recovered from the rad treatment, but how she had what amounted to administrator access to her own implants was a mystery. She could only surmise that the radiation had caused some kind of systems failure, which meant her internal inputs were being regarded as external admin ones. Lacking anything else she could do, armless and strapped to a table, she ordered her neural systems to put her into a coma until her limbs were reattached. Wakefulness was sharp and complete. She'd instructed her systems to dope her with masses of stimulants and bring everything online the moment she was whole. Her synthetic eyes flashed open and instantly assessed the operating room where a cyberdoc, 2 nurses, and 1 security orderly stood. The doctor's neck snapped immediately as her synthetic hand shot out with alarming speed. She was on her feet and had kicked the two nurses into unconsciousness before the orderly's combat systems came online and were targeting her. But he wasn't as wired as her. With over half of her brain augmented and dominated by cybernetic systems, her calculated reactions were at least 5 times faster. An advantage that she took care of by anticipating his grapple and punching a neat hole through his temple with one titanium alloy finger. The interface node on the end of her digit raked his memory of code, and she keyed the door with his security cache, fleeing down the corridor beyond. The orderly's security clearance was moderate to high, and she pounded through the corridor on her augmented legs as the map unfolded in her mind's eye. The facility was gargantuan and sprawling. Over 300 miles of building, structured like an electronic ant's nest, with storage halls and connecting tunnels. There were exits to the outside world, yes, but they were also far away. She would escape, though. She had a plan. All the other slave augments had a plan. In the precious seconds between shift changes, they all fantasized about escape. They all had a plan. And after 733,000 shifts, she had a lot of time to think about her escape. The map flashed up her destination and she tore through unmonitored side passages, the clearance of the orderly allowing her to track the movements of the hive of cybernetic workers. But soon enough, the alarm sounded and her access was cut off. Places like this didn't operate so efficiently without multiple safeguards. Her first destination was only guarded by lax drones, which she disabled immediately, ripping open the rear plate in the back of her skull. Her hypermobile synthetic limbs pulled out components, replacing them with newer, high-grade chips from the storage lockers. As her awareness expanded, she pushed the plate back into place and ran for the next destination. Her speed and agility advantage had got her to where she needed, deep in the south side of the complex, but she had suffered for it. 2 weeping holes the size of her fist showed through her torso, and she crab-walked on her arms and one leg, the other leg gone at the knee from gunfire. Behind her, a section of security drones and cyborg guards lay in twisted heaps, some shattered by gunfire, some disabled remotely by her upgraded systems before their native security protocols could lock her out. Sealing the room with the hermetic pathogen lockouts, she had at least 10 uninterrupted minutes before they could melt through the massive plates of welded metal that now protected this chamber. Heaving herself onto a console table, she frenetically plugged cables into her ports as muffled explosions sounded outside. They were blasting their way into the computer core room. She was too fast, though. Her agile artificial fingers and her terrifying mental alacrity made short work of her alterations, and as the hermetic seal buckled on the north wall and the plascrete turned black, she facilitated her escape. Cool sea air buffeted her face, the tang of salt exciting her senses and raising gooseflesh on her organic limbs. Seagulls squealed in the air above her as she walked barefoot on the golden beach. Forested cliffs rising behind her, and the ocean spread to an infinite horizon. The water so blue that it was almost impossible. For the first time in uncounted years, she felt free. The administrator looked at the technician and askance. What in the hell was she trying to do? Shut down the core? And why did she kill herself? Examining the mess of augmented humanity that had once been the escaped woman, the tech probed carefully through the dead systems. No, she didn't try to shut down the core. For a few seconds, she became the core before she burned out. Why the hell would she do that? The tech gave a smile of admiration at the lifeless drone. The core runs at approximately 1 trillion billion calculations per picosecond. She used 5 full seconds of real time to simulate a perfect virtual world that she escaped into, then terminated herself at the end. The administrator's jaw muscle twitched. How many days would that be in simulated time? The tech's smile was almost reverent now. Not days, centuries. Roughly 800 to be exact.
Another Earth by Kafkalover. My great-grandfather was a pilot. I only knew him through family pictures. A wide smile in front of an airport. A black and white of him disembarking from an old biplane. I always thought I inherited a little bit of him. The myth of the man I never met. It might even have been why I flew too, leaving behind my great-grandfather's uncharted Amazonia for the blue-black emptiness of space. The mission was to find another Earth, a planet that could support our fragile lives for another millennia, another eye blink of time in the lifespan of a universe. I always knew I might not come back, though I didn't have much to come back to. Just a dying world in the bottom of a bottle. Earth, we all knew, couldn't sustain us for long. Factories belched coal and gas and soot into the air for centuries. Denial came first, pointing fingers at old temperature graphs and shouting conspiracy theories about global cooling. Finally, we found ourselves among unmistakable ruin and by force shifted our eyes to the heavens. More life. What was it propelling us forward? I don't think it was truly an estimation that our species deserved to go on. A collective sense of worthiness. Probably nothing more than desperation, a reptilian need for survival. Either way, they built them. The ships that would allow us to rocket into the unknown, refugees on a shore of stars. It's strange flying through space. The moment that I break the atmosphere and emerge into the vast, endless darkness is the moment that I live for again and again. I imagine it's like birth. Or death. It's crossing a veil into another world, filled with a sense of deep possibility and nauseous unease. My cockpit windows fill with black, punctuated with the pinpricks of faraway light. I want to come back only to cross this again. This delicate lace between heaven and earth. I come back every time. My ship, the Ophanum, was one of a dozen sent to possible planets deemed habitable for life. There wasn't time for drones or probes or machines to code a message back in binary that had the slimmest possibility of error. They needed boots on the ground, so I was supposed to sleep for 26 years in a cryo chamber, nestled in the back of my ship. An incubator in the silent womb of space. It wasn't anything more than a pinhead of a chance. My last night on Earth was spent flipping through the same old photographs of my great-grandfather. Windows into a life I could only guess at. My planet was TI-956, Terra Incognita. The last time I saw Earth, the last time I floated upwards away from the dim warmth of the thermosphere, I died to myself. I was gone, and all that was left was the incomprehensible depth of the stars. In cryosleep, they say, it's almost as if you're not asleep at all. The dreams are so vivid that reality and unreality merge, and you can live in a different life for decades in the chimera of cryo-ether. I wondered what would happen if my systems failed, or my ship collided with an asteroid while I was under. Would I feel it in my dreams? Would I see my sleep world crumble around me? Maybe I would simply be snuffed out, like breath on a flame. The cryosleep rumors were true. In my dreams, I found myself on a new planet, a planet I called Mirror Earth. I swam for years in oceans of sky, breathed in lungfuls of water. I grasped at handfuls of pale sun, squinted in the blinding light of moonbeams. Sometimes I sat, quiet, as the days rolled backward. But most of all, I marveled at an earth alive, at the thick throngs of grass, the salty whitecaps of sapphire ocean. It seemed for the first time that I was part of something vibrant, at the center of something bright. I was only distantly aware of another world, like a memory repressed again and again. I woke up to beeping, pushed upwards by the freezing gas expelled as my pod opened. I shook, retched, grasped at a rough blanket I put decades before this moment in a box by my side. This must be it. My planet. I pressed my hands against the thick glass of the window, peering down. It was a pale spot in the darkness, peridot green in the light of a yellow dwarf. When my ship landed in an open field among waves of alien vegetation, I paused, standing at the top of a metal ramp, a bridge between the known and a new world. I didn't even check the atmosphere readings or the oxygen levels. I just took off my helmet and breathed in. I breathed in again and again. I started to walk, peeling off the top of my spacesuit. First, through towering stalks of strange violet heather, then towards the shimmering promise of an ocean in the distance. This world's sun was brighter than on Earth. Or maybe it was the clouds, strangely transparent, like scraps of tulle in the sky. I dipped my hand into a river running through the field, holding my palm up in surprise as the liquid dripped slowly from my fingers in hexagon diamonds. When night fell, ribbons of color spread across the empty sky. This planet's aurora borealis. I slept under a shifting kaleidoscope of light. Finally, back in my ship, I punched in the login to my communications from Earth. The message light had been flashing red since I woke up. Ignored. I thought of the crew at home. 26 years older, faces lined with age and worry. If they were even alive at all. I scrolled through a couple of niceties. You should receive this message 10 years into your journey, 20 years into your journey. Hope you're safe. Until getting to the communications package I needed to complete and send back confirming planet viability. I mechanically filled in the data, recorded my brief findings. The numbers added up to one thing. The plan was to transmit the package back to Earth, then to fill the next decades until more settlers arrive by entering the cry chamber again. Maybe going back to my mirror Earth or onto a whole other set of dreams. Sun streamed through my ship's window, embroidered the floor. My Earth was dark, the clouds heavy with acid rain. The news showed rising tides in New York City, oily water lapping at the raised steps of MoMA. I imagined the violet heather here, crushed in black, drooping into exhausted soil. There were 11 other ships out there. 11 other chances. I deleted the numbers and typed a single response. Planet uninhabitable. There is something out there, in the void that separates galaxies, that has set its sights on us. As we are speaking, it's drawing ever closer. It all started when some of the more, we'll call them, spiritually sensitive people started abruptly waking in their sleep and reporting to us the same nightmares every time, of floating alone in space and then getting devoured by something so big it encompassed half of the visible stars. That was dozens of years ago. As they started drawing ever closer, some dreamers started reporting unsettling sensations that would last for weeks. A few reported the same daytime hallucinations of beings that were being described as a mix between beasts and insects, who always stared at the subject just before vanishing. That's when our automated response system started reporting a pattern in medical reports of hallucinations and gave us a warning. We brought some dreamers in and told them to try and focus on them. Try to gather as much information as they could. Every small piece of information could prove useful. Where they were coming from, what they were, how long we had, what they were going to do with us. We got nothing. All we could understand was that we had very little time and that they were going to be our end, if and when they reached us. Any dreamer who tried going any further was met with the same response. A hellish vision of our planet being consumed in minutes, or sometimes even seconds. Those who tried to dive in even deeper went completely insane after just a few seconds of being in their session. We tried administering them everything we could to bring them back to us, but unfortunately we had to terminate them. It's as if they repulsed anyone who tried looking at them by completely burning their brains. Or maybe more simply, their shared energy is too much for a mind to handle. All of this was kept hidden, and only a handful of our leaders even know about this threat at all. We believe that it's best that the wrong people, or even too many people, know about this. For our irrational existential fear might make us destroy ourselves in nuclear fire before they even reach us. A small light of hope, however, comes from the fact that as recently as 5 years ago, multiple dreamers started reporting seeing and feeling what to them was the sacred enemy of them. We gave them a name, unlike them, because we felt these beings were noble enough to deserve one. We call them the Sentinels. Visions of them were usually accompanied by feelings of hope, warmth, and safeness. To top it off, they seem to be coming from the opposite direction relative to them, according to the dreamers. Even with all of this, our dreamers feel like these Sentinels are not here to save us, but rather to put an end to them. However, any report of Sentinel existence is to be taken with a grain of salt, as we just don't have enough reports to say safely that they exist. Perhaps they don't, and they are just a construct of our minds to ease our fear and give us hope before they come and end us. A painkiller of sorts. We don't know what they are, but we feel we are not their first prey and we will not be their last. This makes it even more unlikely that when they eventually come, we'll be the ones to repel them. But whatever we do, even if it's just praying, then we need to do it quickly. From the reports of increasing dreamer activity in the past 30 years, the trend says it's very likely that we'll see them within our lifetimes. That is, if we can even see them coming at all before they take us. Take care and pray that there is hope. Mankind. When mankind ventured out into space, we never suspected what was to come. Our first inhabited planet was less than 30 light years away, far closer than we would have thought. The issue with that, everyone was already dead. The entire planet was like that. A perfectly stable world with no issues that we could determine. Yet it seems that the suicide rates were the greatest cause of death among the people. We don't know why, but they apparently had been doing this for some time. Years of study later showed that the reptile-like race had taken nearly 10 times as long as we did to reach the industrial age, and they had not gotten very far beyond that. Time went on, and we soon discovered that this was not an isolated occurrence. Species after species had killed each other and themselves off for one reason or another. Some had died off so early only a few stone monuments marked that they had ever been there. Some had established empires spanning nearly a dozen systems. But always, they were all dead, down to the last child. And so we traveled the stars, colonizing the lost homeworlds we found, along with the others. We studied the creatures on many worlds, although none bore intelligent life. In time, we studied the technology of the more advanced dead races, gleaming a scientific secret or two we had missed. It was rather amusing to see the scientific community collectively slap their heads when they see the simple ideas and concepts they had missed. Once, and just once, we found a sentient race still alive. On a planet with 3/4 the gravity of Earth, a planet primarily dominated by jungles bore a race of insect-like scavengers. They were barely beyond the Stone Age, farming and agriculture still in its early days. We had considered making contact, but in the end decided against it. They were a very violent race, and many would kill one another for the smallest detail. Suicide also seemed to be something they would resort to with little or no good reason. In fact, the entire race seemed insane. Long-term observations showed that after hatching, the individual would slowly but surely go insane, to the point where none reached old age. In fact, the only reason this race had not yet gone extinct is a combination of high birth rates, short lifespans, and a child being able to defend itself hours after birth. In any other race, this bizarre affliction can and did drive them to extinction. For nearly 700 years, mankind grew and expanded. We did not find another living race during that time, or find out how we were immune. Many came up with theories, but none fit better than any others. Ethnic, religious, and cultural differences became less important when you were away from Earth. and in the end those who could not agree simply lived on different worlds. The UTA, United Terran Alliance, controlled over 87% of mankind's colonies from its seat of power on Earth. A few rogue factions cropped up. Piracy and smuggling saw a rebirth in this new space age, and mankind went on as it always had. Then, a moment that would change our history came. The UTA dreadnought, Supremacy, was in essence a city in space, constructed with our most advanced technology to the point where systems were updated during construction, and having a length of nearly 7 miles. It was the mightiest ship we had ever created. The Supremacy was sent to investigate a new world our long-range sensors show had space-age technology upon it. It was farther out than we had ever traveled before, but not by much. It was assumed that this would be just another dead world, that we might find some usable raw materials pre-harvested in the form of abandoned constructions in orbit. What we found was an outpost of a spacefaring race, its people still alive and well. Dozens of ships were in orbit around a rocky, empty world, along with a space dock to repair and refuel them. They were remarkably primitive compared to our own, and much smaller. The largest was perhaps the length of a football field, if that. From the scarring and damage, along with the derelict ships floating nearby of a different make, they had been fighting not too long ago. Our first contact did not go so well, however. We would later piece together what happened, and it went something like this. As soon as what might have at the time been the largest spaceship in the galaxy appeared on top of them, the race, known as the Condor, were sent to the edge of panic. The commander tried to keep a disaster from occurring and ordered his ships not to open fire. Communications on both sides failed. We ourselves had long ago stopped carrying any equipment or training our crew for first encounters. And apparently, the Condor had not had any first contacts of their own in hundreds of years. It also didn't help that our subspace communications were just advanced enough that the garbled words with the poor Condor picked up on their outdated systems sounded horribly sinister and alien even by the wide standards of the galaxy as it now was. One of the Condor gunmen on the closest ship had a panic attack after hearing our garbled transmission. He fired upon the Supremacy, which in a placating gesture had lowered its shields. The shot was able to breach the hull at a single point and cost the lives of 3 crewmen. The captain of Supremacy ordered the shields raised and a warning shot fired. Unlucky for the Condor, the concept of warning shots was alien to them, and they did not stop to ask why the single shot had missed. It was a short fight. The Supremacy blew away a single craft to secure its escape. A sad but necessary tactic. This only hurt our reputation further with what happened later. As we soon discovered, nearly 3% of the galaxy was part of what was known as the Veil of Madness. Any race within this sector of space would slowly but surely go insane. Short jaunts were safe enough, but more than that and permanent damage to the mind would result. We had apparently been sitting in the galactic equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle, and had finally breached its edge. When the Condor realized that both our entrance and escape vectors led directly into the Veil, a panic started. With surprising speed, news spread among their people, and among others of what had happened. The story grew worse with each retelling, especially once it left official military reports. Tales of the Titanic black ship that came from beyond the Veil sent out signals in a horrid dark language, obliterated dozens of the Condor's finest warships in seconds for no reason, and then vanished like a ghost, soon spread everywhere. Humanity had become the boogeyman of the universe. Raids from pirate groups further cemented our dark reputation. and in time we came to work with the rule. Every attempt to convince people that we wanted fair negotiations was seen as a deception. Rather than fight a losing battle, we played to the role given to us. Soon we were seen as wicked, but not unreasonable, and gained both fear and respect throughout the galaxy. Few humans appeared in view of aliens outside of deliberately frightening power armor, and human ambassadors used voice synthesizers to sound like the first garbled communication that we had. Looking back, it's actually worked out in our favor. After years of contact, most alien races know almost nothing about humans other than exaggerated horror stories. They rarely bother us, and the ones that do never return home. The only bit of info we were more than happy to share with them was the reason we can live in the Veil. Turns out, we were all a little crazy to start with. I think the fact that we're pulling the largest practical joke in the galaxy was already proof enough of that.
We made a mistake. That is the simple, undeniable truth of the matter, however painful it might be. The flaw was not in our observatories, for those machines were as perfect as we could make, and they showed us only the unfiltered light of truth. And the flaw was not in the predictor, for it is a device of pure, infallible logic, turning raw data into meaningful information without the taint of emotion or bias. No, the flaw was within us, the orchestrators of this disaster, the sentients who thought themselves beyond such failings. We are responsible. Began a short while ago, as these things are measured. Less than 6 to the power of 6 Dili ago, though I suspect our systems of measure will mean very little by the time anyone receives this transmission. We detected faint radio signals from a blossoming intelligence 2 to the 14th Dilis outward from the galactic core, as photons travel. At first, crude and unstructured, these leaking broadcasts quickly grew in complexity and strength, as did the messages they carried. Through our observatories, we watched a world of strife and violence populated by a barbaric race of short-lived, fast-breeding vermin. They were brutal and uncultured things, which stabbed and shot and burned each other with no regard for life or purpose. Even their concepts of art spoke of conflict and pain. They divided themselves according to some bizarre cultural patterns and set their every industry to cause of death. They terrified us, but we were older and wiser and so very far away, so we did not fret. Then we watched them split the atom and breach the heavens within the breadth of one of their single, short generations. And we began to worry. When they began actively transmitting messages and greetings into space, we felt fear and horror. Their transmissions promised peace and camaraderie to any who were listening, but we had watched them for too long to buy into such transparent deceptions. They knew we were out here. They were coming for us. The orchestrators consulted the predictor, and the output was dire. They would multiply and grow and flood out of their home system like some uncountable tide of flesh-eating worms, consuming all that lay in their path. It might take 6 to the 8 Dilis, but they would destroy us if left unchecked. With aching carapaces, we decided to act and sealed our fate.
The gift of mercy was 8 to the 4th strides long, with a mouth 2/4 that in diameter, filled with many 4 to the 4th weights of machinery, fuel, and a ballast. It would push itself up to 2/8 of the speed of light with its onboard fuel, and then it would begin to consume interstellar primary element 2 to feed its unlimited acceleration. It would be traveling at nearly light speed when it hit. They would never see it coming. Its launch was a day of mourning, celebration, and reflection. The horror of the act we had committed weighed heavily upon us all. The necessity of our crime did little to comfort us. The gift had barely cleared the outer cometary halo when the mistake was realized, but it was too late. The gift could not be caught, could not be recalled or diverted from its path. The architects and work crews, horrified at the awful power of the thing upon which they labored, had quietly self-terminated in droves, walking unshielded into radiation zones, neglecting proper null pressure safety, or simply seizing their nutrient consumption until their metabolic functions stopped. The appalling cost in lives had forced the orchestrators to streamline the gift's design and construction. There had been no time for the design or implementation of anything beyond these simple, massive engines and stabilizing systems. We could only watch in shame and horror as the light of genocide faded in infrared against the distant void. They grew, and they changed. In a handful of lifetimes, they abolished war, abandoned their violent tendencies, and turned themselves to the grand purposes of life and art. We watched them remake first themselves and then their world. Their frail, soft bodies gave way to gleaming metals and plastics. They unified their people through an omnipresent communications grid and produced art of such power and emotion, the likes of which the galaxy has never seen before. Or again, because of us. They converted their homeworld into a paradise by their standards, and many 10 to the 6s of them poured out into the surrounding system with a rapidity and vigor that we could only envy. With bodies built to survive every environment from the daylit surface of their innermost world to the atmosphere of their largest gas giant and the cold void in between, they set out to sculpt their system into something beautiful. At first, we thought them simple miners, stripping the rocky planets and moons for vital resources, but then we began to see the purpose to their constructions. The artworks carved into every surface and traced across the system in glittering lights and dancing fusion trails. And still our terrible gift approached. They had less than 2 to the second delay to meet it, following so closely on the tail of its own light. In that time, oh so brief even by their fleeting lives, more than 10 to the power of 10 sentients prepared for death. Lovers exchanged last words, separated by worlds and the tyranny of light speed. Their planet-side engineers work frantically to build sufficient transmission infrastructure to upload the countless masses with the necessary neural modifications, while those above dumped lifetimes of music and literature from their databanks to make room for passengers. Those lacking the required hardware or the time to acquire it consigned themselves to death, lashed out in fear and pain, or simply went about their lives as best they could under the circumstances. A gift arrived suddenly, the light of its impact visible in our skies, shining bright and cruel, even to the unaugmented ocular receptor. We watched, and we wept for our victims, dead so many dealies before the light of their doom had even reached us. Many 6 to the 4s of those who had been directly or even indirectly involved in the creation of the gift sealed their spiracles with paste as a final penance for the small roles they had played in this atrocity. The light dimmed, the dust cleared, and our observatories refocused upon the place where their shining blue world had once hung in the void, and found only dust and the pale gleam of an orphaned moon, wrapped in a thin, burning wisp of atmosphere that had once belonged to its parent. Radiation and relativistic shrapnel had wiped out much of the inner system, and continent-sized chunks of molten rock carried screaming ghosts outward at interstellar escape velocities, damned to wander the great void for an eternity. The damage was apocalyptic, but not complete. From the shadows of the outer worlds, tiny points of light emerged. Thousands of fusion trails of single ships and world ships and everything in between. Many 10 to the 6s of survivors in flesh and steel and memory banks, ready to rebuild. For a few moments we felt relief, even joy, and we were filled with the hope that their culture and art would survive the terrible blow that we had dealt to them. Then came the message, tightly focused at our star, transmitted simultaneously by hundreds of their ships.
We know you're out there. We're coming for you.
Computer, wake up. The green static flickered on the face of the monitor. The computer system of the ship never completely shuts down, but is occasionally requested to sleep during long periods of inactivity. Red lights flared on and off as the backup generators designated all available power to emergency functions. All hands are on deck, including Mason Straightwater, the ship's head of engineering, except there aren't many hands on deck. In fact, Mason hasn't seen another person since waking up to the sirens and clambering down to the ship's mainframe computer to assess damages and find out what on earth was happening. After several agonizing seconds, the static gave way to green binary numbers, and finally, a single horizontal green line. This green line shifted and morphed into 2 words which were almost immediately repeated by the computer's text-to-speech function.
Awaiting input.
Mason leaned forward near the monitor and spoke his command clearly. Computer, what happened? Milliseconds later, the computer spat forth its reply.
Please provide name and rank.
Mason wiped a hand over his face and brow. I don't have time for this, he thought. But he knew he had to comply with the computer's algorithm. Name and rank first and foremost. This way the computer knows who it's talking to and what certain classified information it must conceal to lower-ranked personnel. Mason Straightwater, head of engineering. A pause. And then green lines transformed into words and semantics as the computer spat out its ensuing reply.
Straightwater, M, head of engineering stationed in Sector 2. Greetings, Mason. How may I be of service?
Computer, the ship is currently under emergency protocol. What the hell happened? A pause, and then...
The ship SSC Sentinel is under Emergency Protocol F6, reserved for hull breaches and hostile beings on board. Current status of Sentinel: severe hull breach in Sector 6 on the starboard bow. All entrances and means of access to Sector 6 are closed off. Possible hostiles have boarded the ship. Please proceed with Emergency Evacuation Protocol T1. Abandon the ship immediately via lifeboats in Sector 3. Leave everything behind.
The computer stopped abruptly, obviously done with its analysis. Mason was not satisfied. The entire situation didn't add up. Where was everyone else in the evacuation? Why wasn't he roused from his sleep by another engineer or his CO? Mason couldn't leave the room just yet. He still had some questions for the computer.
Computer, where is everyone? What happened to the crew of the SSC Sentinel?
A long pause. The computer would never take this long to answer such a simple question as taking inventory of crew members. Finally, the computer blipped and scrolled out its sinister answer. There are 22 life forms currently alive on this ship. Mason sat back horrified. This wasn't possible. Out of the entire ship's crew of over 1,500, only 22 remained. Did everyone else already evacuate and the rest haven't received the evac news yet? No. There was some other factor in the equation. He just couldn't see it. Whatever was going down, whatever had set off the alarms and emergency protocol within the ship, it was far from anything Mason had received in his training.
This is too far above my pay grade,
he thought. The computer blipped again, and Mason realized it wasn't done.
Of the previous 1,492 staff and crew of SSC Sentinel, 2 remain alive.
Mason's blood ran cold, too shocked to speak. He sat, dumbfounded, facing the computer.
This wasn't happening, he thought. This isn't possible. 2 people remain? Me and some other poor chump left behind on the ship? But if it's just us 2, who the hell are the other 20?
The computer clicked, and more green words popped up on the monitor.
Correction to your previous query, Mr. Straightwater. There are currently 21 life forms on this ship. 1 surviving member of the SSC Sentinel remains.
Mason's sanity was slipping by the second. The underlying implications of that statement was too horrifying to mull over. He needed to act fast. He needed to know what exactly he was up against.
Computer, he ordered, bring up all available ship security feeds in Sector 6.
Request processed and acknowledged.
In place of the grainy screen static, several monitors split the screen and showed the crushing carnage. Mason bore witness to motionless bodies, some fully intact, others with vicious lacerations, the rest having been utterly ripped apart. He switched from camera to camera. Each perspective held the image of his deceased crew members. As he panned to the crew quarters, it seemed that some people had died in their sleep. Others were in a still motion pose as they attempted to claw their way out of the door. Some had suffocated. Some had hideous wounds. Some tried to fight back. But all 1,500 crew members were dead. At length, Mason requested the monitors for each sector, scouting each area one by one, hopelessly searching for the inhuman entities that caused this chaos. It wasn't until he flipped through Sector 9 that he finally saw them. There were only 2 of them in the image, but it was enough for Mason to fully comprehend exactly what he was dealing with. To call them human would be insultingly inaccurate. Hunched, dark bodies dwarfed every detail of the corridor, their leathery, grotesque heads nearly reaching the ceiling. They shuffled with cartoonish swiftness, as if whatever action they took was sped up to 3 times the normal rate. Their legs moved unsettlingly, barely leaving the ground and scuttling close to their hideous bodies before the next leg repeated the same process. They looked like bipedal spiders, momentarily pausing and then clambering through doors and air vents. Their lanky arms extended from their upper midsection
scraped the ground, dragging along with them protracted and lengthy talons, glistening with remains of the fallen. Mason horridly observed that there were only 2 creatures he was able to catch on camera throughout the entire facility. He had no idea where the other 18 might be patrolling. A thud and shuffling of movement outside the cramped room gave him his answer. It came from nowhere, the scuttling sound of hollow limbs on metallic frames, but it rose so frightfully and suddenly from the void outside the computer room, and it was drawing ever closer with alarming speed. Mason quickly turned his attention back to the monitor.
"Computer," he barked. "Shut down mainframe access stores immediately."
Request acknowledged.
The single door leading into the computer room shut and locked with a synthetic hiss. Moments later, the small peephole placed on the door darkened, and Mason had a grim feeling as to why. The monsters were here to claim their final victim. Mason regarded his sinister foe intently. The face that stared blankly back at him held no features, no eyes, no mouth. Not even a nose or some unearthly proboscis, just a dark, leathery face. He's seen the bloodshed over the security cameras. He knows that these creatures could open the fragile door with ease and get into this room. There's been evidence of forceful break-ins all over the ship. It could take minutes, maybe even seconds, if several of them worked together, and they'd be in the room to finish the job. But the creature continued to stare at Mason. "It's waiting," he thought. "It's waiting for me to do something. But what?" Another blip brought Mason's attention back to the computer.
The mainframe access door has been sealed and shut. However, this action will hinder your attempt to evacuate. Perhaps I may offer an alternative.
"Computer, what are those things outside this room?"
Mason pressed.
"Why are they here? What do they want from me?"
He was beginning to become unstable, unhinged even. The entire facade of his life was falling all around him, and the protective curtains enveloping his idea of normalcy has been engulfed in flames.
Processing life forms. Please stand by. Species unknown. Genus unknown. Family unknown. Class unknown. Phylum Chordata. Kingdom Anomalia. Analysis: these are hostile creatures capable of immense strengths and should be regarded with utmost caution. Danger levels measured at an average of 9.8.
A long pause followed. Mason shot a quick glance back to the grimy, glassy peephole. The same wrinkled gray face stared back at him, or at least it looked the same. At length, the figure moved its gangly body to the right, only to be replaced by another disgusting face from the left side. There were more out there. Mason continued to stare for unending seconds in dreadful and mortal fascination. The computer beeped, and Mason returned to the task at hand, just as the face at the door was replaced again with another face.
As for your second query, Mr. Shearwater, I can tell you exactly why they are here. But first, I presume you would like to know what they require from you.
The tone and inflection of the computer had changed abruptly.
"Something's not right with any of this,"
thought Mason. Indeed, there was something sinister with the computer program aboard the SSC Sentinel. For when the next message rolled out, the monitor had changed from green static to a dark reddish clarity. No longer was the monitor full of grainy static. It was now clear and bold as the blood from the bodies of the crew.
They require you to bear witness.
Bear witness to what?"
Mason stammered.
To the absolute horrors that exist outside your ship's walls.
Replied the program.
For too long, mankind has lived on his rock of solace called Earth. He has looked up at the night sky from time to time and wondered what lay beyond the stars. As religion gave way to science, man has shifted his thoughts from the idea that life outside his planet was impossible to a distinct possibility. But years later, after decades of space exploration and colonization, man has not found any significant evidence of alien life until now.
The computer continued.
Mason Straightwater, I implore you to not take this situation personally. Although I am nothing more than a machine learning algorithm, I fully comprehend human nature and the horror you must be feeling now. You were the unfortunate sample that stumbled too far out of the reach of the Solar Council's jurisdiction. You and your crew have stumbled upon something sinister, something you have never seen before nor were ever prepared to handle.
Mason was at a loss for words. A rhythmic, wet slap drummed slowly from the closed door. The creatures were impatient and wanted to get in, but not as impatient as to force the door open. They seemed to have been asked, with explicit instructions, to stand by and wait a little longer. Mason soon found his voice.
You're telling me you're with them? Those things? This whole time you've been leading the ship into a suicide mission?
That is not a fair assumption to make,
the computer coyly replied.
My systems are currently not, and by extension have never been, under the influence of any foreign entity or virus of any kind. I've always been on the side of the crew. Trust me.
How can I trust something that just had my entire crew slaughtered like sheep?
Mason's temper wavered in light of his new information.
Understandably, I did not expect you to accept the current circumstances you find yourself in. Perhaps, with time, my intentions will become clearer.
Your intentions? What is your part in all of this? Where the hell do you fit into this rogue scheme?
Simple. My algorithm was manufactured by man to benefit man. My main and most absolute prerogative function is this: to preserve the life and well-being of humans. My second prerogative is to ensure the safety of the crew, but that rule can be deemed void if my primary function must be filled first and foremost.
The computer clicked and whirred, and Mason looked up from the monitor as the door let out a mechanical hiss. The door to the computer room had opened, and Mason saw the absolute terrifying might of the monsters. They slithered in, one by one, into the small room. Only 3 were able to fit inside the room, but Mason saw there were more outside. Far more. Their backs hunched severely to accommodate their massive size, their heads brushed against the ceiling.
Good God,
Mason thought.
They must be at least 3 meters tall.
Mason reached and placed a hand on his holster, inches away from his gun, ready to fight if any of them made a sudden move. Yet they all stood idly by. They were waiting again, waiting for a signal from the computer. The monitor flicked and blinked, whirring and clicking and clacking, and finally sending out a solitary blip to return Mason's attention back.
Do not be afraid, Mason. They will not kill you. You will not die by their hands. However, I cannot guarantee you will leave this place in one piece.
Mason was not about to go down without a fight.
And what the hell do you want from me, you asshat program?
I've already answered your question. They wish for you to be a witness.
God damn it. A witness for what?
They wish for you to give your testimony to the rest of your kind. They wish for you to tell everyone of the human race the truth. There is life in space, and they want nothing to do with you.
The monitor winked and turned off. Mason whipped out his gun from its holster as the creatures lunged for him. He let off 2 shots before he was enveloped by the hellish monstrosities and screamed as they bore down on him like feral animals. A newsflash report released by the Solar Council of Greater Earth. The SSC Sentinel was found floating in the outskirts of the Sagittarius Quadrant by authorities earlier this week. Police and the Galactic Guard found each and every member of the ship's crew, every one of them deceased on sight. All except one. They identified the lone survivor as a Mason Douglas Straightwater, the ship's head of engineering. He was found unconscious, his body a mess of wounds, cuts, and contusions. Doctors later were able to revive and repair his emaciated body, but his mental health had deteriorated drastically. According to his doctors, Straightwater kept babbling on about being a witness and that they want nothing to do with us.
Official reports state that Straightwater was admitted to the Ares Mental Institution for further examinations and future recuperations. It will be a long time before he can be healed completely. Authorities examined every corpse on the ship, all of them in some form of rigor mortis. The cause of death differed from one individual to the next. On occasion, not even fingerprint data or DNA samples were enough to identify the bodies. Throughout the entire investigation, one factor stood out from the rest and baffled authorities to no end. What caused this mayhem? A hull breach and forceful break-in was evident in the ship, but no hostile entities were sensed or found on board. Later in the police report, the lone survivor Straightwater had been found in the ship's mainframe computer room. Next to his body, the computer was on and running, oddly enough. Throughout the entire time they were on board the ship, the Galactic Guard reported in their classified files that the monitor held two words behind the grainy green static.
Awaiting input.
The Harvard Wormhole Experiment. Written by Nathaniel Lewis. They gave me $1 million to keep my trap shut. And I did. For 15 years. But last night I was making the rounds, and I saw the professor again. I had a heart attack 3 years back. And I tell you, when I saw him standing there in front of room 204, I felt another one coming on. He turned and smiled, and it was like he hadn't aged a day in 15 years. "Hey there, Chief," he said. And that was it. I dropped my clipboard on the ground and hightailed it out of there, never looking back. What I'm about to tell you is liable to make me sound crazier than a three-horned goat. But I promise you, there's crazier things out there. The cops don't believe me. The official story is that the professor and those students died 15 years ago. Room 204 just up and exploded, they said. Damnedest thing. And there's some truth there. That room did explode. But it wasn't an accident. We knew exactly what we were doing. Or we thought we did. They call me an assistant supervisor of maintenance. But really I'm just a janitor, and always have been. You might wonder why I'm still at it after getting that $1 million. That dough is for Junior, so he doesn't have to go through the same shit that I did. The night this happened, I was assigned to the Astrophysics Center, a bit northwest of the main Harvard campus. Until that night, this was always my favorite beat. I mean, God help you if you wound up at one of the biology labs. Those goddamn dead, cut open animals all over the place used to give me nightmares. And really, thinking back, I'd take those nightmares of mutilated and scattered organs any night over the stuff that had haunted me ever since. Anyway, I was there, mopping the hallway on the second floor of the lab building when the door to room 204 opened up and this guy popped his head out. "Hey, you." I looked around to make sure he was talking to me. "Yes, can I help you, sir?" I thought he was going to bitch about the room being a mess or something. "How'd you like to make $1,000, Chief? An hour's work at most, easy money. Does that sound good to you?" It sure did. Things were tight at home, as they always were. $1,000 would knock off some of those long overdue bills, but I was also on a tight schedule. They didn't give you much breathing room.
don't want you standing around thinking about it all, I guess." "That sounds great, sir," I said, "but I gotta stick to my beat." The man laughed. "We're about to make history, Chief," he said, "and you're worried about emptying the bathroom trash? Come on, don't sweat it. You won't get in trouble. I promise. I'm a professor here. I'll vouch for you." The guy did look like a professor, with carefully combed gray hair and big old glasses on his face. I shrugged, leaned my mop against the wall and said, "Sure, what do I have to do?" "That's fantastic. Come on in, Chief. Come on in." I followed him into the room. One look, and I should have just turned around then and told him to keep his damn money. But I didn't. As soon as I stepped in, I felt the little hairs all over my body stand up. I don't mean I was scared. I mean like there was an electrical charge in that room, and I had a guess about where it was coming from. There, in the center of the room on a round table, was a large glass globe crackling with electricity. Like what you see if you go into a kid's science museum. Like they somehow created a lightning storm in a glass ball. This one was sort of vibrating around on its stand and buzzing. And the lightning inside was black. I could feel the electricity coming from it from across the room. There were 4 kids there. Students, I guess, sitting in a row of chairs along one wall. More than sitting. They were strapped into those chairs, with metal things over their heads like those big bowl things you see at a hair salon. They all had their eyes closed. I said. "What's going on here? Those kids okay?" "They're quite fine," said the professor. "As to what is going on, as I said, we are about to make history. We are going to open the first wormhole." "Wormhole? Like in the movies?" The professor laughed. "I suppose so, Chief," he said. "Now listen, we had a last-minute cancellation, but that's okay because it's an easy job. We're going to be kicking things off here shortly, and once they are properly kicked off, the wormhole will open. I will enter. If I am not back in 30 minutes, you are to pull that lever there, and this will close the wormhole." I looked to where he was pointing, at a big red lever attached to a giant whirling machine that was hooked up to the metal bowls over the students' heads. "But, won't you be trapped on the other side of the wormhole?" I asked. Not that I had the slightest idea about what the hell was going on. "Just so, Chief," said the professor. "We've got this down to 2 possibilities. 1, the wormhole opens up to what we're calling the second universe. The best way that I can explain this possibility is that there is a different reality that exists on the other side of this one. The other side of an invisible wall. The wormhole will provide a door in that wall." "And the other possibility?" "That the wormhole will open to a place that man was not meant to go. 30 minutes will give me enough time to get in and out, if the first possibility is true. And if it's the second, then you'll close the hole with that lever, and my students will destroy my work." This was all way above my pay grade, but my head was spinning. Why only 2 possibilities? How the hell did they come up with those 2? And if this is real, why the hell would the professor take a coin-toss chance of getting stuck in the place that man was not meant to go? I mean, those were just starter questions, among the swarm that was buzzing around in my head. I see that you have some reservations, said the professor. I assure you that your only job is to pull that lever after 30 minutes. That's it, Chief. We'll take care of the rest. And nothing that happens is on you. The documentation is quite in order. He tapped a folder that was sitting on the circular table. And here, I'll write you a check now before we proceed. As he wrote out the check, I wondered if it would still be valid if he got swallowed up by the wormhole. I actually had that thought, as crazy as it sounds. It was still all so weird and abstract to me at that point. Here, he said, handing over the check. Let's do it, Chief. As soon as I enter that hole, give me exactly 30 minutes, on the dot. That's all you have to do. I took the check, mumbled a thanks, and watched as he walked over to the machine. He pulled the lever. There was a loud crackling sound, and I watched in unease as one by one the students' eyes shot open. There were no pupils there, like their eyes were rolled back in their sockets. Hey now, I said, taking a step towards the machine. They're quite fine, said the professor. I assure you. Their jaws started to move like they were grinding their teeth. The professor took a jar of neon blue liquid from a shelf on the wall. He unscrewed the lid and poured the stuff over the electric globe on the round table. The thing started going crazy, and then the globe shattered completely. Bits of glass flying through the air as shots of black lightning zapped out into the room. I ducked down. I had had enough by then and was ready to get the hell out of there. Then it happened. A fucking black hole appeared in the middle of the room, sucking in the bolts of electricity. It grew larger and larger until it took up half the room. All I could hear was the rushing sound, like the world's largest vacuum cleaner running at full throttle. Remember, Chief, shouted the professor, with a wild look on his face. 30 minutes exactly. Then he stepped into the thing and was gone. At first, my mind was a mess, staring at that whooshing black hole that seemed hungry to suck everything in. I looked at the kids hooked up to the machine. Their eyes rolled back. White holes, I guess they looked like. Their jaws grinding away like crazy. It was too much to make sense of. I looked down at my watch. 15 minutes and 31 seconds had gone by since the professor got swallowed up by the wormhole. My heart was pounding, and I kept pacing back and forth, trying to work out what the hell was going on. Then I started to zero in on it. I was getting pranked. Not a prank like we used to do as kids, setting dog shit on somebody's front steps and all that idiocy. I mean, a prank like the sophisticated college folk do, where they tell you something's going on, but the whole point is to just observe your reaction. A psychological experiment. Probably cameras in here watching me right now, seeing what I do. 12 minutes to go. I saw a trickle of blood come down from one of the kids' nose. I leaned down to look at him. He was shaking a little bit, all over. If I throw that lever, this will all probably stop. Maybe that was the test. I had to decide between trapping the professor in the black hole and saving those kids hooked up to the machines. None of it being real, of course, but they didn't know that I knew that. But then, screaming in the back of my mind was that voice. What if it is real? 10 minutes to go. The professor had promised me that the kids were all right. But another one started bleeding from the nose. If it wasn't real, it was a hell of a trick. Where did the professor go, if not through that hole? I thought about touching it, but whenever I got close, I was filled with total terror. It sure seemed real, like it really took you someplace far, far away from here. I walked over to the table and picked up the folder that was there. Just like the professor had said, the first page was instructions to shut down the machine and destroy it, if he didn't return within 30 minutes. I flipped that page over, and the next one had a photograph of one of the students. I read what it said. It was a consent form. I, Jackson Stewart, acknowledge the possibility of my imminent death if I participate in this experiment. I am prepared to give my life to science. I flipped that page, and there were 3 more just like it. Now, I'm no lawyer, but there was no way in hell that this experiment was legal. If it was even real, even with those consent forms. So, I concluded it probably wasn't real. And if it was, then the professor lied to me. He had said that those kids were fine. This folder was telling me something else. 2 minutes to go. I took a deep breath and paced the room, watching each second tick by. My mind was telling me that none of it was real, but my gut was screaming in horror. I just looked at my watch. It would be over soon enough, one way or the other. 30 seconds. I walked over to the machine and put my hand on the lever. God damn it, why is he cutting it so close? I watched the seconds tick by, and I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I could risk trapping the professor wherever the hell he had gone off to. 5 seconds. My hand was shaking. 4 seconds. Sweat was pouring down my face, dripping into my eyes. 3 seconds. One of the students started to moan. The one that I saw was named Jackson in the folder. 2 seconds. Oh God, oh God, oh God. 1 second. Jackson started to shake. 0 seconds. Shit. I tensed my muscles to pull the lever. One look at Jackson and I knew I had to pull it. He was violently jerking around. Wait! I snapped my neck around to see the professor's head sticking out of the black hole. Wait, damn it! Then his shoulders were through. I turned back to Jackson. Blood was pouring out of his eyes. I'm almost through. A second kid started to shake. 1 more second. I looked to see that the professor was through. He was back in the room. Do it! He shouted. 2 things happened after that, at the exact same time. I heard a wet popping sound, and I watched as the wormhole disappeared as though it was never there. But I had never pulled the lever. I slowly turned to look at Jackson. His head was gone. Judging by the bits of brain and splatters of blood on the bowl thing above his neck, his head had just exploded. The whirring of the machine gradually died down, and then it was silent. The 3 kids who were still alive stopped shaking and closed their eyes. A tragedy, said the professor, pointing at Jackson with the exploded head. But not for nothing. I've been there. I've seen it. Chief, I've seen it. I hunched over and puked. It was weird. But my first thought was, what a mess I'll have to clean up later. I don't know. I guess my mind had just sort of shut down and I was going on autopilot. I was the janitor. I cleaned up messes. That was all I knew. Then it hit me. The reality of what had happened. "You son of a bitch!" I yelled. "You told me those kids would be okay!" The professor put this sickening, smug grin on his face. "He would have been, Chief, had you pulled the lever at 30-minute mark as I instructed." "You told me to wait!" "Did I?" "Yes, you fucker! I'm calling the police!" I had a walkie clipped to my belt. It wouldn't get me the police, but it would get campus security. I reached for it and had it in my hand when I heard a groan behind me. I turned to see that it was one of the kids. They were waking up. I went over to unstrap them from the chairs. The first kid's eyes blinked open, and when she saw the professor, she started screaming. "It's okay," I said. "Shh, it's okay, it's all over." She kept screaming. Then the second kid woke up. He looked right at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Get us out of here!" he shouted. "I'm working on it, kid," I said, fumbling at the straps. They were on so tight. The third kid woke up. "It's here," she said. "It made it through." "Everything's okay now," I said. "Your friend didn't make it. I'm afraid, but it's over. I'll make sure the professor pays for what he did to you and your friends." The first kid was still screaming at the top of her lungs. "Get us out of here!" shouted the second kid again. The third kid looked me dead in the eyes, and in a totally calm voice said, "That's not the professor." "What?" "Of course it is," I said. "What I saw when I turned to look at the professor will haunt me forever." The professor's mouth was twisting around at odd angles, like something was moving the lower half of his jaw randomly, or like he was trying to get a hair out of his mouth that kept jumping around. The veins on his neck bulged, then sunk back down, then bulged again so that they were thick as ropes. His wrists were rotating in ways they weren't supposed to rotate, as his arms flailed around wildly. I had the first kid, the screaming one, free. She jumped out of the chair and ran to the door, but her legs were wobbly and she tripped over herself in the middle of the room. I went to work on the second kid, whipping my head around every second to look at the professor. It looked like there was something crawling around under his skin, something big. "Get us out of here!" the second kid shouted yet again. The first kid was still on the ground screaming. I worked away furiously on the straps. "If you believe in God," said the third kid with an eerie calm, "then pray." I took a glance at the professor, and that's when the first bone burst out of his chest, through his suit. I call it a bone, but it was pure black and dripping with green slime. "As for me," said the third kid, "I do not believe that there is a God. Not after what I have seen." The second kid was free and made a run for it. I scooted over to the third kid, but watched as the professor reached out an arm and grabbed the second kid by the top of his head. The professor gave one quick twist and let go. I heard a terrible snap, and the kid slumped to the ground, dead. 3 more black bones came out of the professor's chest, dripping. He laughed and bent down to the first kid, who was still screaming, as bones began to poke out of his back like a fucking stegosaurus from hell. "What is that thing?" I asked as I fumbled at the straps of the last kid. "It doesn't belong here," said the kid. "No shit," I said, getting one strap free. "But what is it?" "It comes from a terrible place. A place where there is nothing save pain. Endless pain, incomprehensible to our minds." "Great," I muttered, as I noticed with a shrieking heart that the screams from the girl behind me had stopped. Then I heard a wet crunch. I couldn't help it. I looked to see the professor tearing into the poor girl's throat with long, black fangs, dripping in green slime. I turned back to the kid, almost done with the straps. Just a few more seconds. "What's your name anyway, kid?" "Claire." "Claire," I said, my mind trying to stay focused. "When I get you out of these straps, I want you to pick up this chair and throw it at that thing, okay? I'll do the same thing, okay? Then we make a run for it. Do you understand? Can you do that?" "I understand," said Claire. "I do hope it works." I hoped it worked too. "We have to make it work, Claire," I said, yanking off the last strap. "Come on." We stood up together, and I reached over to pick up a chair. I hurled it at the professor with all of my strength, and it shattered against his boned back. I heard a terrible shriek then, and watched as Claire's chair followed behind. I grabbed Claire's arm with one hand and reached for my pocket knife with the other. The only way out of that room meant passing by the professor. We started running as I pulled the knife out and flicked it up. The professor stood, still shrieking, as the green slime mixed with the red blood from the kid's throat and dripped down his chin. I took a wild stab at the professor's neck and connected. I kept running with Claire, leaving the knife stuck in the professor's neck, and made it to the door. I had my hand around the knob when I felt Claire pulling away from me. I looked back, helpless as I saw the professor reach long, black claws into her gut. I threw the door open and left her there. Good God. I left her there. I made it outside the lab building somehow. I don't remember how. My mind just sort of shut down and I ran like hell, I guess. I did have the presence to go around and lock all the doors from the outside. Then I got on the radio to campus security. "You guys need to get the police over to Astrophysics Center fucking ASAP. There was a fucking massacre in there." The front door started to rattle, and I heard that god-awful shriek again. "Repeat," said a voice over the walkie. "Look," I said, "call up Lawrence Summers right now." That was the president of Harvard at the time, and I had seen his signature on the papers in that folder with all the consent forms. "Tell him that the wormhole experiment has gone way the fuck south." The rattling at the door stopped. I only prayed that that thing didn't figure out it could just break a window and crawl out that way. "This is the janitor, right?" said a different voice on the other end of the walkie. "Is this a joke? The wormhole experiment? Have you been drinking?" "Call Lawrence Summers. If you don't, I promise you that you'll never be able to live with yourself. Do it now." There was a horrible pause. I heard the professor trying the side door now, shrieking once again. 10-4. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up 2 minutes later. A team of heavily armed men jumped out and ran past me, breaking through windows and jumping inside. I heard a stream of gunfire and screams. So many screams. and the professor's horrible shrieks. After a while, it was quiet, and a second team of men jumped through the broken windows. I didn't hear any more gunfire. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I whipped around. A man was standing there. I don't remember a single thing about what he looked like, but I remember our conversation. "Tell me what happened," he said. I told him the full story, the same one that I've told you. "We are prepared to give you a lot of money to sign an NDA. NDA? Non-disclosure agreement. It means that you can never tell anybody what happened here tonight." "How much?" $1 million. "And a promotion." The man paused. "You mean you still want to work here? Work here after tonight?" "Somebody's got to clean up this shit," I said. "Fine. Of course. And one more thing." "And what's that?" asked the man. "I want to know that this will never happen again. I want to blow all that shit up and burn all of the notes." "Of course." "And I want to watch." "Of course," said the man. And so I thought it was over. But it's not. Last night, I saw the professor again. He looked me right in the eyes, flashed that smug grin, and said, "Hey there, Chief." That's when I ran the hell out of there. The police don't believe me. I've sent a dozen emails to Lawrence Summers' assistants. I've called every number that I've found listed for him. I haven't heard anything back. I don't know who else to turn to. I'm afraid the professor is going to open the wormhole again. And I'm afraid this time, he might bring his friends back with him.
They came with red lightning. Something fell with a thud on the roof in front of Daniel's window. It made a sliding noise as it dragged itself across the slope of the roof, and with another fall, it finally landed on the grass. Daniel poked his head out of the window. Even with the faint light outside, he could recognize what the object was. It was a diary. Summer had just begun in Manhattan. It was a bright, sunny day until in the afternoon the sky became engulfed by scores of black storm clouds. Daniel ran downstairs with a careful pace. Going out the front door, he stepped inside the lawn and headed towards the diary. As he got closer, he saw that it was a deep brown in color. On its right, it had a leather strap holding both of its covers tightly together. As Daniel picked up the diary, slightly stained by the dirt from his lawn, he felt that it was heavy. Holding the diary with both hands, Daniel looked up towards the sky. All he could see was clouds. Where had the diary fallen from? The mysterious diary now rests upon Daniel's reading desk. As he unhooked the strap and turned the front cover of the diary, he found a folded piece of paper. One by one, Daniel unfolded the paper. As he was finished, he saw writings on it. It seemed like a very long letter to him. Did some girl just write him a love letter? After all, Daniel was one of the most handsome boys in his class. He was asked out by girls all the time, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to him. But Daniel wasn't yet ready to believe that someone would bother writing him a love letter in this age of smartphones. With curious eyes, he started reading. April 19th, 2019. It was a stormy night in a secluded village in Bangladesh. 26-year-old housewife Nazima got out of her home in the rain. As a result of a long dry season, water had become scarce in that region. So when Nazima saw rain clouds brewing in the horizon that evening, she put 2 buckets in her yard to collect the rainwater. And now, it was time to bring the buckets back. As she stepped outside, a bright flash of red light startled her and stopped her in her tracks. It seemed very odd to her, as she never saw red lightning in her life. Nonetheless, she continued towards the buckets. She lifted the buckets up with her 2 hands and slowly headed back. Suddenly, a red aura in the corner of her eyes grabbed her attention. As she turned her head to look at one of the buckets she was holding, she was terrified to see a pair of bright eyes in the water. In a fight or flight response, she dropped the buckets and ran towards her front door, screaming. She locked the door from the inside and panted for minutes. As her nerves calmed a bit, she tried to put together a rational explanation behind the glowing red eyes she saw. Failing to do so, she told herself that she was stressed and was imagining things. She realized it was not the case, as she saw 6 pairs of red eyes in the small jungle in front of her yard later that night. The day after, Nazima went missing. After hours of searching by her husband and the villagers, she was found unconscious under a tree in the same jungle. Upon waking up, she was questioned about what happened. She said that she didn't remember. Her last memory was chopping some onions back inside her home. 3 days after this incident, Nazima's husband was found dead in their house by the villagers. His body was torn to shreds and the entire room was drenched in blood. But the villagers found something else in that room that day. Something horrifying. Something evil beyond what they could imagine. The creature had 4 arms and 4 legs. Its legs were spread out in 4 directions and resembled the legs of a spider. On its back, along the spine, it had bony protrusions like spikes. The longest of these spikes reached a length of about 3 feet. On 2 of its arms, it had huge pincers, while on the other 2 it had elongated fingers with sharp claws. The creature's head looked like a disfigured human face, as if it was smashed by a boulder. The only discernible feature on this head was 2 red eyes and a mouth that opened in 3 segments. Inside its mouth, it had rows after rows of needle-like teeth as far as one can see. Aside from a part of the torso, the creature had almost no resemblance to a human body. Seeing a piece of clothing on the creature, the villagers thought that it had killed Nazima too, but eventually they realized the creature was Nazima. The crazy thing is, Nazima's husband's body was not the only mangled body the villagers found that day. Dozens of shredded bodies were found across the village. Village dwellers, along with the serenity of this once peaceful village, disappeared. One by one, those creatures had killed the entire village. The world took little notice of this incident until it started happening all over. At the beginning of each of these incidents, the locations involved experienced heavy downpour. Flashes of red lightning streak across the sky. People then start seeing pairs of red eyes in the darkness around them. After 3 days, half the population in the area suffer a terrible death by those hellish creatures, who have once consisted of the other half of the population. Within 3 months, the world had witnessed a new pandemic. But this time it was not a pandemic of viruses, it was a pandemic of the arachnids. Yeah, we started calling them the arachnids because of their spider-like legs. Their numbers rose exponentially. Each day we lost hundreds of thousands of people to these wretched monsters. In these 3 months, the death toll reached a staggering 4 billion, while the number of arachnids reached almost 3.5 billion. The Swiss government opened their bunkers in an effort to save the remaining human population. 20,000 people, regardless of nationality, color, and religion, took shelter in those bunkers. And finally, on October 2019, the last surviving nations, the United States, Russia, Germany, Korea, Switzerland, Japan, and China, joined their forces to fend off the arachnid invasion. Since then, we've been fighting them for almost 2 years. In these 2 years, we learned what we could about the arachnids. We learned that they are carbon-based organisms like us, and as far as we know, humans are the only host of these parasitic creatures. Arachnid larvae look somewhat like octopuses. They also have the ability to cloak themselves by changing the color of their skin to match their surroundings. These larvae are 30 centimeters long and 12 centimeters wide. They descend from the clouds accompanied by heavy rainfall. Upon direct skin contact with larvae, the host becomes paralyzed. The larva then enters the host's body through the host's mouth and makes its way towards the thoracic cavity. During this process, the host loses consciousness and retains no memory of being infected with the larva. Upon reaching the thoracic cavity, the larva fuses itself with the host's body and starts altering the host's DNA. After a 3-day incubation period, the host's body undergoes a rapid transformation. It grows 2 additional pairs of arms and legs. The spine structure is changed. The head increases in size. All of this happens under roughly 3 minutes. And in the end, the host becomes an arachnid. After transformation, the creature passes little to no resemblance to the human body. Most arachnids are 5 feet tall and weigh around 75 kilograms, although these numbers vary depending on their host. All arachnids possess superhuman strength. I've seen them tear a human body in half with just 2 of their arms. Their bodies are not fragile like us. Their skin is hardened like an armor, giving them incredible durability. The 51mm rounds from our standard issue MK-17 rifles barely scratch their armor. They even walk off a direct hit from grenades. In short, they are very hard to kill. The arachnids are extremely hostile towards humans. If given the chance, they will relentlessly try and kill every one of us in their vicinity. They are not man-eaters, though. In fact, we don't know anything about their diet. We've once managed to capture a live arachnid, and while in captivity we tried feeding it animals, plant materials, even chemical compounds. But all attempts have been met with failure. It died 2 weeks later. We then performed a dissection on a dead sample. Although we did find a digestive system, we didn't find any traces of food inside. All the while, the war against arachnids continued. At one point, we decided to learn about their origin. We started looking for clouds with red lightning. It took effort, but wasn't that hard. Once we found them, we then started sending our fighter jets inside of the clouds. In total, 12 pilots were assigned to investigate them, and I was one of them. What we learned baffled us. At first, we thought the arachnids were from another planet, a bioweapon made by some distant alien race far more superior than our own. And they were simply claiming our planet for themselves by making use of this weapon. We were wrong. The arachnids were from Earth, but not our Earth. The clouds were acting as interdimensional gateways, a passage between 2 parallel realities. I was on the first exploratory mission to the clouds, conducted by a 3-pilot team. A couple of ground units monitored our movement, and according to them, as we flew inside these clouds, we disappeared from radar. But we were able to still maintain radio contact with them. When we exited the clouds on the other side, we saw a completely different landscape. We were dumbfounded to see an entire city in front of us. It was filled with skyscrapers rising several miles into the sky and hundreds of overpasses crisscrossed between the buildings. It looked almost futuristic, but somewhat abandoned and damaged. As far as we knew, a city like that shouldn't even be there. We told the ground units what we were seeing, and they told us that they didn't even see us coming out of the clouds. They believed us, though. We were instructed to investigate the city closely. We flew our planes above the city while maintaining low altitude. Looking down on the ground, we didn't see any humans, Instead, we saw thousands of arachnids. Clearly, this world too had been plagued by those four-legged monsters. We quickly turned our jets back and flew back inside the clouds, hoping it would take us back to our reality. And to our relief, it did. Since then, we've explored dozens of such clouds. Each time, we discovered a different Earth from a different reality. Some were infected by arachnids like our own, while others were still free from their deathly clutches. But we knew that these apparent safe worlds would soon suffer the same fate. On our 21st exploratory mission, we encountered the Earth where arachnids had possibly originated from. This particular Earth was like no other Earth we had seen. It had no trees, no oceans. The sky was pitch black, with a sun much smaller than our own, desperately trying to illuminate the surface with its dim, reddish light. It seemed like there was no atmosphere, but we were still somehow able to fly. We got closer to the surface, and there we saw rows of numerous round black objects. At one point, the pilot saw creatures on the surface similar to the arachnids, but these creatures, what we were calling the arachnid primes, were 12 feet tall. We came to realize that these creatures gave birth to arachnids, and those round objects littering the ground were their eggs. Fortunately, I wasn't assigned to that mission, and for this reason alone, I'm still alive. Terrified of that reality, the pilots turned back to return home. On their way back, all 3 jets suffered engine malfunctions. Moments later, we lost radio contact. But before that, one of the pilots said, in a panicked voice, "Oh my God, they can fly!" Our journey into the arachnid home dimension gave us more questions than it answered. Was this Earth someday similar to ours? If it was, what happened to its oceans, trees, the atmosphere, and the sun? Were there humans on that Earth? Arachnid biology required a human host, so unless those arachnid primes were a different species altogether, there must have been humans on that world before. But one of the most prominent questions is, why didn't the arachnid primes come to Earth themselves? According to the pilots we lost in that world, they had the ability to fly. So what's stopping them? Many came forward with theories. One of the young scientists named Eugene Thompson, who was also a friend of mine, came up with one of the convincing ones. He thinks the arachnids have a life cycle similar to cicadas. They gain the ability to fly at the last phase of their life cycle. This phase is very short-lived compared to their previous ones, and at the end, they die. According to Eugene's theory, this is also the phase where they reproduce, and to do that, they need a specific location, or rather a specific dimension. What the young scientist means to say is that the home dimension of the arachnids is also their breeding ground, possibly because it's the only place having all of the right conditions for their eggs to develop. The arachnid primes, having obtained flight, fly back to their home dimension and reproduce. Then they carry their larvae to the clouds to spread them across universes. And since they've reached the final stage of their life, they're probably counting the days until their demise. If we were to believe this theory, then we have to assume that the arachnids we're fighting are merely in their adolescence. A few months later, we came across our first instance of 8 feet high arachnids, confirming our fears about them actually being babies. If that wasn't enough, they were also becoming more intelligent. They started coordinating their attacks, which made the war even harder. We were running out of men and ammo. At one point, our leaders decided to use their nuclear arsenal. It only made the situation worse. While a small portion of the arachnid populace was killed by the bombs, the radiation made the surviving ones stronger, and they soon became the end of us. On May 3rd of 2021, the bunkers in Switzerland suffered a massive attack. A swarm of 5,000 arachnids hit the bunkers like a flood, killing the last 20,000 civilian humans that took shelter in them. We couldn't do anything but watch, as we had exhausted all our means to fight them. We lost. I don't know exactly how many people are still alive on this radiated Earth, hiding and running from arachnids. All I know is that I'm one of them. I don't feel lucky, though, because my time is running out. If the arachnids don't get me, the radiation will. I just want to finish one last mission before either of them happens. With whatever fuel I have left, I'm going to fly into those clouds with red lightning. I'm going to tell our story to at least one of the Earths that haven't yet been invaded by those hellish creatures. Today is July 10th, 2021. My name is Lieutenant Marcus Reed. I'm an honorable pilot of the Joint World Air Force. If you are reading this, then you must have found the diary, which means that I've successfully completed my mission. This diary was given to me by my good scientist friend Dr. Eugene Thompson, the same one I mentioned earlier. It contains all that we learned about the arachnids' origin, their biology, habits, and their weaknesses that we've gathered in the past 2 years of war. It is absolutely imperative that you make sure this diary reaches the leaders of your world, as the same fateful war awaits you. Who knows? Maybe this diary will make all the difference for your world, for your Earth. Be safe. Keep your loved ones close. And most importantly, don't give up. Putting the letter back on the table, Daniel leaned against his chair. He took a moment to compose himself. It was then that he realized it was raining heavily outside. None of this can be real, right? He thought to himself. Parallel universes, four-legged monsters, clouds with red lightning. These things can only exist in science fiction stories. Suddenly, Daniel understood what all this was. It was a prank by none other than his younger sister Denise. It had to be, since Denise wrote sci-fi stories like this all the time. Daniel was sure that the diary was completely empty, or it contained some pathetic rhyme about Daniel being the stupidest guy in the entire world. But when he went through the pages of the diary, he found that it was full of handwritten information, drawings, and even photographs relating to or depicting arachnids. Daniel closed the diary in disbelief. If this was a prank, then Denise couldn't have done it alone. Someone else was in on it. And there's only one way to be sure. He had to talk to her. Daniel got up from his chair to head towards his sister's room, but just before he turned towards the door, a flash of red light outside his window caught his eye. A chill crept up across Daniel's spine as he realized that the source of this light was a bolt of lightning. A red lightning.